Picture this, your usually laid-back neighbor, the one who always waves and lets you cut through their yard, suddenly slams their door and bolts it shut. No warning, no explanation, just a firm, silent, "Not today." That's the vibe. That's exactly what happened when Canada, America's famously polite upstairs neighbor, decided to close the border. It wasn't just a gentle "sorry, not right now," it was a full-on maple syrup-fueled "nope." For decades, the U.S. Canada border was less a barrier and more a friendly suggestion. People zipped back and forth for work, to visit family, to shop for cheaper milk, or just to snap a selfie at Niagara Falls from what many claim is the better side. It was a symbol of how two countries could be close, yet different, and still get along. But then, almost overnight, the world's friendliest border transformed. It wasn't a wall of concrete or steel, but a wall of new rules, regulations, and a very firm, "No, eh?" Suddenly, the easy back and forth was gone, replaced by uncertainty and a lot of questions. Suddenly, the dream of driving to Alaska, cruising through endless forests and tiny Canadian towns, became just that, a dream. Canada, tired of the noise and chaos from downstairs, locked up tight, leaving Americans on the outside looking in. America, the self-proclaimed land of the free and home of the brave, found itself grounded, not by its own rules but by the quiet resolve of its northern neighbor. For once the tables had turned. Canada, a country known worldwide for its politeness and sorries, flexed its muscles in a way no one saw coming. It was a polite power move, but a power move nonetheless. The border, once a symbol of open friendship and easy cooperation, suddenly became a literal line in the sand, a reminder that even the closest neighbors have boundaries. Even the best of friends can disagree, especially when health and safety are on the line. The pandemic forced everyone to make tough choices, and Canada chose caution over convenience. And right in the middle of it all, President Donald J. Trump, a man who's never met a wall he didn't like, but this time, he was on the wrong side of someone else's. The irony was impossible to ignore. The world's most powerful nation, with the biggest military and the loudest voice, was told you can't pass by a country with more moose than tanks. It was a diplomatic showdown, Trump's America First bravado clashing with Canada's quiet, steady resolve. Two leaders, two styles, one very closed border. The world watched as the U.S. president squared off with Canada's prime minister, not over a battlefield but over a lonely stretch of highway that suddenly meant so much more. This wasn't just about a border crossing, it was about national pride, political posturing, and a whole lot of confusion for families, businesses, and travelers caught in the middle. For the first time in a long time, the polite neighbor had finally said nope, and meant it. And for once, America had no choice but to listen, learning that even the friendliest borders can close when the world turns upside down. The year is 2020. COVID-19 is everywhere. Streets that were once bustling with life are now eerily silent. People stay indoors, glued to the news, as the world faces a crisis unlike anything seen in generations. Countries across the globe are shutting down, scrambling to contain the virus. Borders that were once open and welcoming are suddenly sealed tight. In the midst of this chaos, Canada makes a bold and unprecedented move. On March 21st, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau steps up to the podium and announces that the border with the United States is closed to all non-essential travel. It's a historic decision, one that will ripple across both nations. Canada holds the key to the north, deeply concerned about the virus spreading from the U.S., which is experiencing a much larger and faster-growing outbreak. The stakes are high, and the government isn't taking any chances. The closure hits Alaska especially hard. Alaska is separated from the rest of the United States by over 500 miles of Canadian territory. For Alaskans, Canada is the only land bridge to the lower 48 states. When Canada closed its borders, it didn't just stop tourists and vacationers, it effectively cut off the main land route to Alaska. Suddenly, the highway that connected families, businesses, and communities was off limits. Overnight, the classic American road trip from Seattle to Anchorage was no longer possible. The dream of driving through the wilds of Canada to reach Alaska was put on hold. Canada's message was clear: protect its citizens at all costs, even if it meant cutting off a U.S. state. The government prioritized public health above all else, determined to keep the virus at bay. Essential travel, like for truckers carrying food and supplies, was still allowed. But for regular people, strict new rules were put in place. The days of spontaneous road trips and cross-border visits were over. Americans driving to Alaska now had to prove their trip was essential, stick to a direct route, and avoid all sightseeing. No camping, no selfies with moose, just get through, and do it quickly. Every stop was monitored. Travelers received special tags for their cars marking them as just passing through. These tags were a constant reminder that this was no vacation, it was a strictly controlled journey. Some Americans who broke the rules were fined or even turned away at the border. The Canadian authorities enforced the restrictions with zero tolerance, determined to keep their communities safe. Canada was serious. Its country became a corridor, not a playground. The border was no longer a symbol of friendship, but a line of defense. The message was unmistakable: get to Alaska, and get out. No detours, no delays, no unnecessary stops. The world's friendliest border had transformed into a no-nonsense checkpoint, with strict rules and constant monitoring. For Alaskans, it felt like a lifeline had been cut. Families were separated, businesses struggled, and the sense of isolation grew even stronger. For Canada, it was about safety first, protecting its people, even if it meant making tough choices and shutting the door on its closest neighbor. Look at a map. Alaska is America's garage, 2 blocks away, and you have to cross Canada's yard to get there. There's no direct road from Washington to Alaska. You must drive through Canada. The Alaska Highway, built in Watu, is the main route, a 500-mile lifeline through Canada's wilderness. Other routes exist, and there's a ferry system, but ferries are slow and expensive. For most, driving is the only practical way to move to or from Alaska. When Canada closed its roads, it was like cutting the only bridge to an island. Flying or taking a boat was possible, but costly and complicated. The closure wasn't just inconvenient, it disrupted thousands of lives. Families, workers, and students were stranded or forced into expensive alternatives. Alaska's quirky geography became a major geopolitical headache. The border closure turned a routine drive into a logistical nightmare. Geography suddenly mattered more than ever. Why did Canada act so decisively? In early 2020, COVID-19 was raging in the U.S., and Canada saw chaos to the south. Canada's unified response contrasted with America's patchwork of rules. Keeping the border open felt like leaving the door unlocked during a zombie apocalypse. Provincial leaders pressured Trudeau to protect their low infection rates. The Alaska loophole didn't help. Some Americans used it as an excuse for Canadian vacations, ignoring quarantine rules. Canada cracked down, prioritizing public health over tourism or neighborly convenience. It wasn't anti-American, it was pro-Canadian survival. So how did President Trump react? Predictably, not well. The idea that Canada could block Americans on their own continent was infuriating to him. Trump saw the closure as an insult, not a health measure. He publicly pressured Canada to reopen, framing it as an economic issue. Behind the scenes, he was reportedly furious, even floating ideas like tariffs or sending U.S. troops to the border for screening, ideas Canada flatly rejected. Trump's bluster met Trudeau's calm resolve. Trudeau stuck to science and public health advice, politely but firmly saying no. The standoff became a battle of personalities. Trump's confrontational style versus Trudeau's steady hand. Press releases replaced punches, but the tension was real. Trump couldn't tweet his way out of this one. Canada simply wouldn't budge. The world saw a new side of the polite neighbor, and Trump learned Canada could say no. While leaders argued, Alaskans suffered, military families faced expensive moves, students were stranded, and businesses relying on summer tourism saw disaster. The empty Alaska Highway was a symbol of economic pain. Alaskans felt isolated, cut off from their own country by a foreign government's decision. Desperate, Alaska's leaders proposed air bridges and ferries, but solutions were costly and complex. The state was a pawn in a bigger game between Washington and Ottawa. Alaskans paid the price for a border dispute they couldn't control. Their unique geography became a vulnerability. The closure was a harsh reminder of Alaska's dependence on its neighbor. The U.S. Canada border is the world's longest, stretching over 5,500 miles from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and even up to the Arctic. It's often called the world's friendliest border, a symbol of peaceful coexistence and open exchange between two nations. But the pandemic proved that undefended doesn't mean unregulated. Suddenly, what was once a line you could cross with a wave and a smile became a hard stop, guarded by new rules and uncertainty. The border is full of quirks, like Point Roberts, Washington, a tiny American town cut off from the rest of the U.S. by Canadian land. When the border closed, its residents were stranded, unable to drive home without crossing international lines. To help, Washington state set up a special ferry just to bring in supplies and essentials, highlighting how geography can complicate even the simplest needs. The border isn't a straight line. There's a 20-foot-wide slash cut through dense forests, visible from the sky. In towns like Darby Line, Vermont, the border runs right down the middle of streets and even through buildings, blurring the line between two countries in daily life. The Haskell Free Library sits directly on the border. During the closure, families from both sides met there, separated only by a line on the floor, close enough to see each other, but unable to cross. The Alaska Highway, built by the U.S. during World War II but running through Canadian territory, stands as a symbol of both cooperation and dependence between the two countries. When the border closed, it became clear just how much the U.S. relies on Canadian goodwill to reach Alaska. Travelers suddenly faced new challenges just to get home. Geography isn't just lines on a map. It shapes real lives, dictating where people can go, who they can see, and how communities function. Overnight, the border's quirks, once just interesting facts, became real obstacles, disrupting families, businesses, and entire towns. The crisis forced everyone to rethink what borders really mean. Are they just political lines, or do they define our sense of belonging and connection? Even the friendliest lines can become walls, dividing people in places that once felt inseparable. And sometimes, no matter how friendly the neighbors, the map and the border it draws wins in the end. The standoff couldn't last forever. Pressure to reopen grew, but Canada moved cautiously, step by step. The real turning point came with vaccines and a new U.S. president. Under Biden, talks became more collaborative. As vaccination rates rose, Canada eased restrictions. On August 9, 2021, Canada reopened to fully vaccinated Americans. The U.S. followed in November. The reunion was emotional. Families reunited, Alaskans could drive south again. Canada reopened on its own terms, sticking to science and caution. The crisis gave Canada a firmer voice. The border reopened, but the relationship had changed. What's the legacy of the Great Border Blockade? The episode tested U.S. Canada relations, revealing both strength and fragility. Both countries learned that open borders are a privilege, not a guarantee. Future policies will be more cautious, with plans for the next crisis. For Trump, it became another grievance. Proof, in his mind, that America was disrespected. If he returns, expect a tougher stance on Canada. The border's future is more complex. Talk of smart borders and digital health checks is growing. Alaskans are rethinking their dependence on Canada, exploring new links to the lower 48. The story is about more than Trump's frustration. It's about geography, sovereignty, and the realities of international friendship. The border is open, but the memory of the wall lingers. Even the closest allies can disagree on how to keep their people safe. The quiet no from America's neighbor won't be forgotten, and neither will Trump's reaction.